Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Howard Browman. I'm a research scientist at the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research. So I'm speaking to you today about this topic from the perspective of a researcher, an active researcher and author, also an editor-in-chief of a long-standing marine science journal. So my experiences with respect to what I'm seeing as an editor. And also from my roles with the Committee on Publication Ethics on the Council and Trustee Board. So that's an organization that's trying to establish some ethical framework for the use of artificial intelligence in scholarly activity, scholarly outputs, and also the Council of Science Editors, on which I'm on the Editorial Policy Committee, which is trying to work out procedural aspects of how to deal with artificial intelligence. I've underlined generative because I'm primarily going to be referring to just that. Not AI is necessarily use in helping people with what they have created, but rather with AI entirely or mainly AI generated material and content. So, yeah. So, yeah, just as a reminder, you've probably all been reading about this. Is a list that's by no means exhaustive or complete of the concerns about using generative AI in scholarly research. First one, which I'll be speaking more about, which everybody is seeing both in their daily lives and in their professional lives, is mass generation of low quality content, so-called AI slop. AI as an author, as I will tell you, is not permitted, but AI as a ghost author is a separate issue. Ghost author meaning, not disclosed. And I'll be saying a few words about that. Using AI risks plagiarism, not necessarily knowingly on the part of the person who's doing it, because AI is scraping these large language models or scraping material off the internet and then regurgitating it, as you see in the cartoon. And it may be plagiarism. On the other hand, the next one, the risk of hiding plagiarism, and this would be knowingly, is that people ask the AI to rewrite a piece of text so that it will not be detected as plagiarism. AI hallucinations is maybe the one we've all heard the most about. And this can be from hallucinations from errors in factual material, such as references, to making them up completely, fabrications. AI scrapes what it finds on the internet, so it's not without bias, and it can also amplify bias because its access to information is not complete. There would be unethical use of AI, and what exactly that might be is still being worked out. And I'll go through some of that with you in the rest of my slide deck. Safety and security for your data, your content, your personal information, your intellectual property and originality, because as soon as you start interacting with AI, or uploading your intellectual property into it, it's public unless you're working with an offline AI, but even then, it's unclear. All of this is still being worked out. And long-term negative implications, cognitive implications for people who use, overuse, misuse generative artificial intelligence. So certainly a potential degradation in people's skills as scholars and researchers. Okay, so in the face of all of this, people are trying to come up with the frameworks. This is just one example for, in this case, 10 simple rules for optimal and careful use of generative AI in science. This is split into blue, orange, and green as you go counterclockwise, with the blue being rules you should follow before you use generative AI in your research, and orange while using it, and green after using it. I don't want to dwell on a lot of these. You can see them quickly here as I'm talking, just to give you an idea of how people are thinking about this. And you can be asking yourself as you read these rules, whether any of you have actually done this, might do it, or even if it's possible to do it. Okay, so following from that, I'll make these assertions before I continue. Few researchers are following the rules that I just showed you or any analogous rules. They're just adopting AI. Generative AI in scholarly work and publishing is being adopted prematurely and without an ethical framework. Large numbers of high-profile disasters and embarrassments are inevitable and are already occurring. You've probably all seen news stories about some of them. An unknown but certainly large and rapidly increasing number of undetected AI-generated nonsensical or vacuous, so noise articles, are being published. So how is this happening? Well, this is just one example. It's not necessarily using the kind of general LLMs that everybody hears about every day, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, whatever. It's also bespoke, more bespoke large language models, such as the one that you see here, but this is just one example. If you do a search, you will find many such examples. So this one is called the Draft Outline Research Assistant. Just follow the red arrows in the slide and you'll get an idea what this is, the effortless creation. So instantly generate high quality scientific papers, essays, patents, conference abstracts, and more with just a few clicks. Save time, I'd say, save time and stay focused on your core research. So effortless creation. And then you can build your expert AI team with AI agents to perform complex analyses, consolidate results in one place, et cetera, et cetera. And also to generate your hypotheses and your insights and conclusions for you. So, you get the idea. So I think an important aspect of all of these tools that we need to take a step back and just say that none of the claims that are made for these things have been thoroughly verified or vetted. So user beware. And in fact, if you read stories about this, the creators of these large language models say openly that they don't fully understand how they work. And if they don't understand how they work, I think it's important for people to think about something in research that's core is being able to reproduce something. And if you don't know how you have produced it, and even the people who make the product don't know how it's producing things, how can you reproduce them? So I'll move on to the next part with that as context. So what are editors already seeing? They're already seeing what you see in this cartoon, and which I've already referred to, large numbers of AI-generated, AI-assisted submissions to journals, and also books that are entirely created by AI. So associated with this rapid increase in AI-generated material are a growing number of high-profile disasters and an unknown but large, certainly, number of undetected AI fabricated articles. One prominent in the news type of article is so-called letters to the editor. And so what has been observed is that suddenly journals are receiving much higher numbers of letters to the editor about articles that they have published, so critiques of articles that those journals have published that are written in a kind of a template way and often come from authors who, when you look them up, have no discoverable connection to the topic of the article that they are critiquing. This is very important. And the prominent examples of this that have been covered by Science, as you see here, or elsewhere, are authors who have produced 50, 100, 500 letters to the editor in 1 year. Not only and not surprisingly, are AI tools being used to produce content, they're also being used to assess content. So journal editors send a manuscript to an expert, a topic expert. And of course, the journal editor expects to get the topic expert's opinion about the work. What they get instead is an AI-generated review report. Now, that violates several norms of peer review. One is the confidentiality, of course, so you are really not permitted to share confidential content with an online LLM. You might be able to do so if it's an offline LLM, but that would be up to the publisher, and you need to seek permission unless it was already formalized. But as you see from this slide, it's quite prevalent, at least in the context of the poll that was conducted and reported, as you see on this slide. So peer review as well. Embarrassments, this is just a couple of prominent examples that were covered widely in publication circles. The one on the right, the famous rat with the giant genitalia, and the clearly senseless labels, figure labels. A couple of examples on the red arrows, at the end of the red arrows, and also on the left side, this autism spectrum disorder, very clearly, erroneous, misleading AI-generated graphics. And this has led some journals to, ban AI-generated graphics. So another thing that journals are seeing, which is related to this, to the description that I told you about for letters to the editor, is manuscripts that are submitted from authors who, when you look them up, have no discoverable connection to the topic of the manuscript that they've submitted. This is being referred to as AI-generated or AI-assisted human polymaths, polymaths being people who can work on many different fields. And so just out of curiosity, I asked ChatGPT to answer the question in orange: what is an AI-generated human polymath? And the answer was, an AI-generated human polymath usually means a human who appears polymathic because AI is doing a lot of the heavy cognitive lifting behind the scenes. In other words, a person whose breadth of skill, knowledge, or output is amplified, scaffolded, or partially authored by AI. So I don't want to go through everything on this list, but look at the ends of the arrows, because I found it really astonishing that ChatGPT would tell me that use of AI as a constant cognitive partner, not just as a tool, but a thinking prosthetic. And then it even raises questions such as, is mastery of the topic required, or is orchestration of a large language model enough? I think, at least I personally am a little bit frightened reading that answer. So let's take some extreme examples, because it's listed under embarrassments. So this is an extreme example that was making the rounds a few months ago. So this guy produced thousands of outputs over a very short period of time. You can see the numbers, the crazy numbers on the right. Look at the ends of the arrow. Those numbers are correct. This person generated almost 4 million citations and had an H index of 1,659 by playing games with Google and self-citing himself and all kinds of other things. Unbelievable. So these extremes kind of make the point. So I referred to hallucinated references earlier, and I'll throw this out at you, some of the things we can discuss during the question period. So I would assert that verifying sources is a fundamental aspect of scholarship, and not just scholarship, journalism, for example, as well. The presence of AI hallucinated references in a manuscript is evidence that the authors have not verified their sources. So such articles, to me at least, are the antithesis of scholarship. And we should ask ourselves, what consequences should there be for authors that are caught engaging in such practices? So for example, sending in a manuscript in which a certain percentage of the references cited are entirely fabricated, made up, don't exist. So here are some thoughts, again, for possible discussion during the question period. I would assert that the less knowledge and experience that you have about whatever it is that you are asking generative artificial intelligence to do, the more risky and irresponsible it is to use it. And that is for reasons of accountability. You cannot be accountable and you cannot verify. Using AI to generate content that you know little to nothing about is not scholarship. So what are publishers and journals doing about all of this? I'll segue into that. I think it should be clear to everybody, but I'll state it anyways, that this is an arms race in which rapid developments in the technology will always be ahead. So I'll come back to my slide about concerns, which is AI as an author. I think pretty much all of the scholarly output, scholarly publishing organizations fairly quickly came out and stated that AI tools cannot be listed as an author of a paper. And that is because they cannot meet the requirements for authorship, because they cannot take responsibility for the submitted work. But that leads me to the text on the right. And the question is a human who mainly writes prompts to produce an article and is not necessarily an expert in the field, are they a legitimate author in the first place? And can they really take responsibility for the content that's been generated? So here's the STM guidelines, the Generative AI in Scholarly Communications that they released at the end of December 2023. I've put a red box around the second one on the list here, but you can take a quick look at this and you can see that use as basic author support tool. So to correct, edit, format text and documents and refine them is permitted and disclosure is not necessary. Uses transcending basic author support tool is permitted, but disclosure is necessary. And I've put question marks there because I think it should be obvious to everybody, it certainly is to me, that this is not very clearly defined. That is, what is transcending basic author support tool? How is that actually defined? And it's not. That's very important. And then create, alter, or manipulate original research data and results is not permitted. Credit generative AI as an author of a published work is not permitted, but that still leaves the gray zones that I've already referred to. So what do some AI use policies look like? This is one for my journal, the journal that I'm the editor-in-chief for. So our journal will not consider for publication manuscripts whose content is wholly or substantially AI generated, even if the content has been verified by a human who agrees to be accountable for the work. This policy is consistent with the STM guidelines that I just showed you. So that's one example. Another example that is related to this emergence of these AI-generated polymaths that I explained to you is very interesting. And that is the authors with no discoverable credibility on the topic of their manuscripts are being viewed with all due skepticism. So if you see here, demonstration of author expertise, meaningful senior oversight, and clear contributions. Since large language models became publicly available, the journal has received an increasing number of submissions, many of which we believe are AI generated. This increase in the submission rate of manuscripts that do not meet basic standards for scientific integrity and verifiable authorship has forced us to revise our policy to address these challenges. And that is, authors have to demonstrate that they have expertise in the topic of the manuscript that they've submitted. So, and let's come to disclosure. You saw on the previous slide that publishers are requiring disclosure. And so they've come up with this kind of bureaucratic, this is a very text-heavy slide. You don't really have to look at this while I'm speaking. It's just to give you a sense for the levels to which the publishing industry is going with respect to defining how AI has been used and how to disclose it. So the key aspect of this is, to me, at the ends of the red arrows, we reiterate that use of AI in other stages of research processes, so this is just referring to the publication part of the process, is outside the scope of this classification. This classification considers only activities that use AI tools to assist with the preparation of manuscripts. So there's a big hole there. So following from that framework for disclosure, for me, the key questions that we can talk about in the question period are, is disclosure enough? And what about accountability? Is it enough to state that you accept responsibility or are accountable even when you have no expertise on the topic? I would say, how could you be? Will anyone really look at full disclosure of AI use? So think about this list, and this is not even for everything. This is just for the publishing part. So you can imagine a much more elaborate list than this for all possible uses of AI. And then that should be all disclosed, maybe in a big supplementary material file. So all the prompts used, the prompt history, the versions of the document is to allow someone to assess what is the human generated and what is the AI generated content. And we should ask ourselves, even if someone would look at that, what's the acceptable ratio? Nobody knows the answers to that question. Okay, so I'll end with a few slides about what I'll call the AI future is now in scholarly publishing. Publisher integrity teams, so the large publishers, resource-rich publishers now have large and growing integrity teams that are already using AI tools to assess the credibility of the authors who are submitting to them, the content before it ever is forwarded on to the journal that it was submitted to. So what does some of this look like? I'm just going to go through these very quickly because there's a lot of it, but it goes to things like, using large language models as a jury to determine whether it's appropriate for the journal with respect to scope, and these LLMs will make a recommendation to, well, at least theoretically, a human editor. Here are some examples from the publisher Frontiers. They have been using artificial intelligence. Perhaps they're, certainly early adopters. Their tool ERA, Frontiers Artificial Intelligence Review Assistant. So this is an example output. Take a look at the red arrows. You see 2 critical authors have high rejection rates. 7 authors have 5 or more submissions in the last 90 days. 1 author has 50 publications in the last year. 2 authors have invalid emails. So using AI to screen authors and to assess their credibility and make a report to, as I say again, theoretically a human editor. And here is another example of this, to using AI to help their reviewers to prepare their reviews, generate a preliminary checklist for reviewing the manuscript. What key aspects should the reviewer focus on when evaluating the methods section? What are the key elements to check for in the manuscript? So in a sense, almost taking it out of the hands of a human and handing the human an AI-generated guideline on how to review the manuscript. And then also assessing the review report quality. So it says in blue, editors are required to assess the reports for their content and rigor. So at least that. So it's kind of a summary of all of this. AI tools are being used, possibly with minimal human involvement, to assess manuscripts for relevance to the journal, for quality and novelty, and to make a recommendation to a human editor. There are already journals that are publishing exclusively, entirely AI-generated articles and that are being assessed by AI. And so the question I'll leave you with is, which future do we want? The left, the right, or some hybrid in the middle, which is as yet undefined?